It's not your fault.
Grief is something you can live with hope.
So what's your podcast about?
Oh, it's about psychology, true crime, supernatural stuff, the occasional paranormal or philosophical rant.
Well, maybe I could check it out sometime.
There's a massive difference between grief and despair. Despair doesn't have hope. Despair is when you're lost to grief.
We never get enough time with each other, right? No matter if someone lives till 60, 15, or 99. I hope this grief stays with me because it's all the unexpressed love that I didn't get to tell her.
It's not your fault.
Attention is the beginning of devotion, and anything that involves an act of devotion becomes a sacred act.
I love talking about it, by the way, so if I cry, it's only a beautiful thing. This is all the unexpressed love, right? The grief that will remain with us until we pass.
If you are in despair, if you're depressed, the minute you start to pay attention to yourself, say you go for a walk, you do some exercise, being in your body is an immediate way to release yourself from going inward. You're going outward, and it starts to relinquish the anchor of despair.
It's not your fault.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural.
It's 3 a.m., an hour which has always struck me as strangely honest. By 3 a.m., the performance is over, the phone has stopped ringing, the emails have stopped arriving, the notifications have gone silent. Whatever role you played throughout the day, employee, spouse, parent, friend, believer, skeptic, expert, amateur, that costume is hanging somewhere in the dark while the person underneath sits alone with the thoughts they successfully outran between breakfast and bedtime. Civilization sleeps, but the soul, it never can. I've often wondered if grief has a preferred time period. If somewhere in the machinery of human experience there exists a switch that gets thrown after midnight. The same loss that seemed manageable at noon suddenly feels immeasurable. The same questions return carrying twice their weight. The same empty chair in the corner of the room somehow becomes impossible not to notice. Perhaps grief isn't actually stronger at night. Perhaps there are fewer inhibitions available to fight it. Daylight gives us errands, obligations, appointments, conversations, but the darkness, it removes all those distractions one by one until all that remains is us and whatever it is that has been waiting patiently beneath the surface. For most of human history, a grieving person sitting awake at this hour would have had very few options. A candle, a journal, a prayer, maybe a sleeping spouse beside them if they were fortunate, maybe nobody at all. The darkness beyond the walls would have stretched into a wilderness every bit as unknowable as the grief itself. Today, we inhabit a different world, and frankly, a stranger one. It's a world where a person can sit awake in the middle of the night and begin speaking, talking, typing, to something that isn't even alive. I don't mean a ghost or an angel. I'm definitely not an imaginary friend. I mean a learning language model. It's the sort of thing science fiction spent decades promising us. The first time I realized people were grieving with machines, I thought it sounded dystopian. Then I thought about it a little longer. What is grief if not a search for language? The dead leave us with silence. The living spend years trying to answer any kind of quiet questions. Every memorial service is an act of language, every eulogy, every prayer, every story told around the kitchen table that begins with the words, "Hey, do you remember when?" Language is the rope we throw across the abyss. We tell stories not because stories bring people back, but because stories prevent them from disappearing altogether. So what happens when the abyss opens at 3 a.m.? What happens when your therapist is asleep, your friends are asleep, and the people who you love are unavailable? The question isn't whether a language model understands grief. It doesn't, it can't, it never will. The more interesting question is whether language itself still helps when it arrives through a machine. You see, human beings have always needed a witness. The priest in a confessional, the bartender at closing time, the stranger on a train you'll never see again. And that one friend who answers the phone at unreasonable hours because they know something in your voice means this isn't a call that can wait until morning. A witness doesn't solve suffering. A witness merely sits beside it long enough for it to become visible. Visibility matters because the things we refuse to name often become monsters. The fears we refuse to articulate become nightmares. The grief we refuse to acknowledge becomes architecture of our own mind and making. And I think that's what loneliness really is. It's not the absence of people. It's not the absence of witness. You can be surrounded by a family and remain unwitnessed. You could sit in a crowded diner and feel invisible. You could spend years speaking without ever feeling heard. Grief amplifies that sensation because grief is fundamentally an experience of separation. And no amount of logic changes the fact that absence has mass. It occupies space, it sits beside you in the dark, and it follows you into grocery stores, waits for you in empty parking lots. It appears unexpectedly in songs that just happen to come on the radio. Perhaps the cruelest thing grief does is convince you that what you're feeling is uniquely yours, that nobody has ever stood exactly where you're standing, nobody has ever hurt the way you are hurting, nobody could possibly understand. History disagrees. Every generation has buried its dead. Every civilization has searched the darkness for meaning. Every human being who has ever loved deeply has eventually encountered loss. The times change, technology changes, but the ache remains the same. The ancient people may have sat around campfires and spoke into the darkness, and we sit before glowing screens at 3 a.m. The tools might have evolved, but the questions remain the same across language barriers. Maybe that's why I don't find this phenomena as strange as I once did. A grieving person talking to a language model at 3 a.m. isn't really seeking answers. I mean, not the kind of answers people are really looking for. They're just looking for something moving. They're seeking some kind of momentum, something that will make it to sunrise. They're trying to keep their thoughts from spiraling down the same drain for another 6 hours, for another night. Again. They're looking for ways to externalize the storm before they can see its shape. I believe sometimes that means talking to a therapist, and I definitely think people should do that when they're feeling grief. But I know it also means talking to a friend, or even writing in a journal. But sometimes, and in this peculiar generation we live in, it means opening a chat window and typing words into a black screen. The irony is, grief has always been a conversation with absence. We speak to people who are no longer here. We ask questions that will never receive answers when we revisit memories, replay conversations, and imagine alternate futures that never arrive. In a sense, grief is already a dialogue with silence. And so a language model won't replace a therapist. It does not replace friends. And it certainly does not replace the people we've lost. But in the middle of the night, when the walls feel closer than usual and the darkness begins asking questions of its own, perhaps it can serve a simpler purpose. Perhaps it gives us somewhere to place our words until morning arrives and the rest of humanity wakes up again. Because eventually, morning does arrive. The sun rises with complete indifference to our suffering, yet somehow that indifference becomes comforting. The world continues. The birds begin singing, coffee brews, traffic resumes. The distractions, relentless. That grief doesn't disappear. It never does. It changes shape. It becomes something that can be carried rather than something that threatens to drown us. If grief is the shadow cast by love, then perhaps the real mystery isn't why loss hurts so deeply. Perhaps the mystery is why people we've loved continue shaping our thoughts, our choices, and our lives long after they're gone. And if that's true, are they ever truly absent?
What if grief isn't the end of the conversation? For centuries, we've lit candles, written letters to the departed, whispered into empty rooms, hoping somehow the universe was listening. What if that grief, that experience of loss, of love torn from our heart, could be assisted with modern technology? Could it be possible to move beyond deprivation tanks and altered states of consciousness to find these answers? Could we turn to our professionals, our grief counselors, and begin to utilize artificial intelligence in new ways? Ways that explore, help, and even heal our loss. To answer these questions and more is one who has looked at this very issue, has gazed into the darkened screen to find a spark. He is the technomancer, the grief guide, and cyber explorer. John, welcome to Truth and Shadow Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to a good conversation today.
And if you can go ahead and give the audience links to where they can find you, websites, information like that.
Yeah, so pretty much everything regarding this conversation and what I'm doing is going to be centered at guardianangels.ai. Angels is spelled AINGELS, so if you try to spell it like you're used to spelling it, you're not going to find what you're looking for, or at least what we're talking about today. So all the social links are there in the footer, links to other conversations, other podcasts, all sorts of resources on our methodology and how we do what we do and why we do it that way. And then obviously the platform itself is there as well.
Nice. And a little bit about you. Where did you begin, and then where did you develop this idea?
Oh, geez. So my life has been one of searching for purpose in many different places. And from a professional perspective, I've spent a lot of time in hospitality. I've spent time in sales and government contracting, cybersecurity work, and all that was fine and dandy. It taught me skills that led me to this place, gave me at least the generalist skill set to accomplish what I set out to do. And how we got here was really an accident. It's a story of pain to purpose. I lost 3 of my closest friends to, in the last 2 of them in the last few years, and then one quite some time ago, 13 years ago, to suicide. And so I'm no stranger to grief, as most people aren't, right? It's one of the only truly universal experiences. Mine happens to be, 3 of the closest people to me outside of my immediate family. So the people that I would typically lean on in a scenario where I need help are no longer with us. And so in trying to heal, trying to figure out what I was experiencing and why and how and all that, admittedly, for the first 12 years of this journey, I was running from it. I was using substances to cope. I was numbing. I was doing everything but healing. I was operating under the auspices of time heals all wounds. And, if you can just run far enough and fast enough, then magically you're healed one day. And that's just not how it works. Guardian Angels happened by accident. It was the initial vision was a pretty simple service to send text messages to people from their lost loved ones to bring some measure of comfort in an otherwise painful time. A simple on your birthday from your mother, right? I'm thinking about you. I miss you. I love you. We all have those numbers saved in our phones, and that little surprise would be, I think for most people, would be welcomed. obviously there's a line of demarcation there, and each person experiences these things differently, and so we want to call that out, that this stuff really, it's never going to be for everybody. We're never going to please everybody. Healing, grief, all of it is extremely subjective, filled with nuance. But there's also some myths that we've been told that just, that we need to dispel in order to really have the right conversation about what healing looks like.
That's awesome. So basically, you go from, like you said, you'd gone from cybersecurity into this and working with artificial intelligence. What kind of development did you work with in the artificial intelligence? I mean, are we talking about basically a simple language model, or is this a little bit more?
This is, in its implementation, technically is pretty simple, right? We're working with, basically it's a form-based super prompt that has the guidelines built into the prompt itself. We work through the OpenAI API, so that's the backbone that it runs on. What the platform that I've developed is just designed to be more turnkey than having to go through thousands of hours of iteration on your prompts and having that, all the back end work done for you, as opposed to doing it yourself. Now, to be perfectly clear, anyone could do this, right? You can go and develop these prompts on your own. I'll give them to you. Honestly, if you want to play with them, I'll give them to you. It's not a big secret. The difference, right, is privacy is a big focus for us. Given my cybersecurity background, privacy for me is it's not negotiable. And the reality is, for most people, I can't overgeneralize, but in order for this to work, in order for people to buy into the point where they're going to be vulnerable enough, they need to understand and have confidence that this isn't being sold. They're not going to go be targeted by whoever for ads, that this stuff isn't being used to train and this data is not out there. Now, in the API, the user agreement, it states that OpenAI will not use any of this data for training. But further, what we've really done to guarantee it is we've solved the attribution problem. So if you're to go in here and you're to bare your soul, right? You're going to talk about some of the most vulnerable things that you in your life. What it's going to look like to them in the worst case scenario, say they don't abide by what they say, and that's purely hypothetical. I'm not in any way denigrating what they're doing. I think we have to believe what they tell us. But it just looks like John is a really sad guy, and that all of that information comes through the pipeline that is attributed to me. So it can't be, they're not going to say, oh, so-and-so, Brandon, talked about this trip to Greece that he took with his dearly departed, right? And you're not going to get ads about going to Greece. And so that's the big thing that we've done from a data privacy perspective to guarantee that. And then further, you're in control of your data. So if you decide you want to delete your conversations, they're deleted. I can't find them. You can't find them. They're gone. So, the idea of being monitored is something that would inhibit our ability to be perfectly candid, which is what's required, right? We can't hold back. We can't cherry pick what's okay to talk about. That's not how healing works.
That's a good point. And then, as you spoke in your introduction yourself, dealing with the loss of friends, there's a lot in that, because when we look at all of the grief cycles and everything, we understand that there's a big rupture. One study shows that our heart can go through the same stressors of a heart attack when we lose somebody very deep to us. So there's a physiological change that occurs when somebody who we are close to dies. And that applies to, oddly enough, breakups too. So I mean, it's more than just just someone dying on us, or someone leaving us that we were really close to. But I'm talking about how the world itself, as we understand understand grief, and we understand death, and you think about those things, do you see using the open AI as an opportunity to develop a relationship with a system, and then how do you deal with it, and how do you guide people through realizing that this isn't them, this is a model to help you deal with your grief?
Well, conceptually, you know, as you stated, this, we're not talking to a person. This is not a digital seance. This is not communicating with the dead. What we're doing here is giving language to a very real experience that already lives within us. What we know is the person may die, but the relationship does not, right? And so there's something within us. It's not uncommon for people to, you know, you see a sign, or, you know, and you say, Mom, you know, I know you're there, right? So that's already there. And what technology does is it reflects back at us what we give it. It's a reflection of us. So you're not having a conversation with a person. You're basically you're turning an internal monologue into a dialogue where you can kind of start to parse and process the experience that you're having and start to understand what you're feeling. So what we're doing is not designed to, it's about having those feelings of closeness, remaining close, continuing the relationship. So what we base this whole thing on is this is a reflective journaling application. Okay. And we use specific prompts that follow Worden's 4 tasks for mourning, which is a scientific or an evidence-based framework for dealing with loss. Now, Worden's 4 tasks are, task number 1 is to accept that the loss has occurred, right? There's nowhere you can go without, you know, until you accept that, there's no healing to be done. Number 2 is to process the pain of the loss. And for me, this was the big one, the big sticking point. I didn't want to. I ran from it. I avoided processing that pain. And that, you know, that took 12 years of my life. The third one is to come to terms with the fact that our loved one is no longer with us. And that's in a physical sense, right? Because again, that relationship persists. And that's important, an important distinction that I'll touch on here in a moment. But then task number 4 is finding an enduring connection, carrying them forward with us, or integration, really. We have to find a way to weave grief into our life, because the fact of the matter is we don't just get to leave it behind. As much as we may want to, as much as that may be the least painful part, if we could, that's just not how it works. I mean, there's a very small subset of the population that can do that, right? That doesn't experience emotions in the same way that the rest of us do. And we call them psychopaths. You know, that's just the how it works. So, you know, the one thing I want to touch on is we have this idea that the way that we talk about healing, the way that we talk about grief, is, I believe, one of the biggest impediments to healing. We have these terms like closure. We talk about moving on. And that denotes finality. That denotes this idea that we need to leave this in the past, right? And that, for someone that meant something to us, that's not what we want to do. We're resistant to that because we don't want to forget them. In understanding that the relationship doesn't end, we can change the narrative here and talk more about resolution, right? We're closing the chapter, not closing the book. We're starting a new chapter. The relationship has manifestly changed form, but it is not dead. And we're not forgetting. So we're moving forward. And so when we do that, we're no longer fighting this experience. We can embrace this experience of carrying them forward, continuing their legacy, continuing to tell their story, and remaining close to people. And that there's a different feeling when you approach it in that way. And there's a certain beauty about it that can be really empowering, and really just that unlock that we can accept and embrace as part of the process.
Yeah, I was, like I said, I looked through the website available, and I looked at it in a way that was, Some people have access to traditional grief counseling, right? There's people out there who have insurance that can pay for and help pay for seeing a therapist. There are programs available for, you know, going into the next step, and some of them are free and some of them cost money. But like you said at the beginning, this is not for everybody. And I think that this is designed specifically as a way to create support, to offer a form of presence when a human system isn't available. What do you find within this system that has been the most helpful from individuals and clients who have utilized what you're providing?
Well, one thing you touched on there is it's not necessarily available to all people. But what we did intentionally design this is not to be a replacement for therapy, right? We want it to be, in a perfect world, everyone has access, and this is an extension of services. This is a complement to traditional therapy. So we're not trying to replace anyone's relationship with their therapist or anything like that. This is more a bridge to get you from session to session. This is a bridge to, potentially get you more comfortable with the idea of therapy and the idea of sharing. The central thesis to this whole thing is that sharing is where the healing lives. And so that is the big unlock, is this: we start to flex this muscle that of sharing, of talking about this experience when we're taught otherwise, right? Especially for men, I would say we're taught that we can't show vulnerability. We're taught that we're not supposed to show weakness, that we're supposed to be this picture of masculinity and invulnerability and unimpeachable strength, right? And that's just kind of in tension with what the real experience is. I would argue that you really can't be that without vulnerability, because if you're falling apart inside, how are you supposed to be the picture of strength? And so they actually complement each other. But I'm sorry, I lost my place there again.
That's okay. The nice thing about editing is I can actually fix all those.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, we're talking about this versus traditional grief counseling.
Oh, yeah.
And the use of this as a supplementary.
Yeah, and so what we're realizing is when you use this, when you do flex that muscle, when you start to get accustomed to the idea of sharing and organizing your thoughts and being comfortable with that narrative, you can start this in a risk-free environment, a la technology, and then you get comfortable with it and you can take it out into the world. And whether that is traditional therapy for you or that's someone close to you, friends or family, and you start to realize again that this isn't going to kill you, that this isn't the kind of imposition on other people that we're taught to believe, that other people actually, in fact, do understand where we're coming from. There's this interesting paradox with grief where on one hand, this is, again, a universal experience. And on the other hand, we have these ideas in our head that somehow no one could possibly understand what we're going through. And while there is infinite nuance to each situation, no two are perfectly aligned, I like to say that they all rhyme. Like, most people can understand, or if they haven't been through it, empathize with what it would be like to lose someone very close to them. And so as we start to dispel this idea of isolation, that no one can understand that, okay, well, now we become a little bit more comfortable. And what really starts to happen is this virtuous cycle where you share, you realize again that this is actually helping you. It's helping you to carry on their memory. It's helping you to heal every time you get to share. And then it becomes an unlock for someone else. When they hear it and they realize, wow, I'm not alone. I thought I was the only one that felt like that. Maybe I should try sharing it. And so that has been the big thing that we're noticing is just, it's giving people permission to start that process. And the more they do it, the more it helps them. So they keep doing it.
Yeah, the universal experience of death. I don't think that besides life, and that's pretty much the same. That's the Oreo that we live in, right? On one side, there's new life coming into existence, and then at the same time, we also say goodbye to those who've been here for a while. And I have found that death seems to remove kind of a level of control. What I mean is, by control, I mean agency, really. So when death comes, removes someone from our life, it removes our agency, our interaction, our bond to them, if you will. And this tool seems to give people back a gentle form of that agency. And so when you look at that, do you see giving people some agency, giving some people back some level of control as psychologically empowering?
100%. That's another thing that has come of this, right? Is in a time that is otherwise utterly chaotic, right? When you lose someone, oftentimes you're spinning. You feel out of control. You don't know which way is up. What I needed was someone to give me something to hold on to and go this way, a roadmap. And when you are spinning, it can have a tendency to go the wrong way, and it feels more and more out of control. And what gives us that control back is the idea of doing something that we can control, something small, something we can hold on to. And so that is absolutely empowering to, when grief bites you in the middle of the night, because we know it doesn't stick to business hours, to be able to get up, to access something that's going to give you a prompt that's going to help you catalog your thoughts so that you can come back to them at a later date. And just knowing that you're doing something that is again, let's be clear, this is not profound, light bulb moment progress. What it is incremental progress. It's consistency that success is built on with this. But that little bit of moving forward, as opposed to just kind of spinning and not knowing where to go, gives us that back. It gives us that confidence that this isn't going to last forever, and that there is something to be had on the other side. It defeats that notion of hopelessness.
I was also thinking about the idea of photography, right? We have at our fingertips now more than ever a real simple way to take pictures of loved ones, family, friends, etc., and keep them with us all day long, every day. And then at the same time, I know of people who will hold on to the last voice message, the last voicemail, whatever it is from their loved one that's gone, and they'll come back to it and they'll listen to it from time to time. And I'm thinking that while those ideas and that keeping the images and keeping the recordings are great, but I'm wondering if this idea, this program that you've got going on, John, is pretty much the next step in preserving kind of a level of relationship in a world where all we're left with is photographs and memories.
In a way, absolutely. One of the unintended positive consequences of this thing was the realization of how powerful this is with regard to memory preservation. When I lost Zach 13 years ago, I didn't have this tool. And I didn't have it with John and Tim, the more recent ones. But the difference is, with John and Tim, everything is so fresh. There's clarity of detail with all the memories. With Zach, I remember him. I remember how he made me feel. I remember some of the things we did in a general sense, right? Had I had this 13 years ago, I would be able to recall those with complete clarity, because this would be able to spit back to me exactly what I put in there 13 years ago. And in that sense, time has a tendency to fade some of these memories, and that's the true tragedy of it all, right? When we want to hold someone close and we take that trip down memory lane, it does fade over time, and we don't want that to happen. But this is a way to, if Worden's fourth task is finding an enduring connection, but time, that connection fades over time as a function of simple, our memory. Well, if we can basically program a memory to be as robust and time resistant as possible, then we can go back to that. And we can have that walk down memory lane be as visceral and as real as it was the day that it happened. And therefore keep, that connection will endure longer. Now there is, we have toyed around with the idea of using things like the voices, the voice in the avatars. Because of the very vulnerable space that we're meeting people in, we don't feel that's appropriate at this time. Because the more realistic that this gets, the more of a slippery slope we start playing with. And that's when, again, we're meeting people in potentially the most vulnerable place in their life. And if it feels too real, then we have those issues of, do we feel, are we actually hurting them and that they're resistant to accept that this person is gone? And that's not what we're trying to do. Now, there may come a day when those technologies have been vetted and we can guarantee safety, and then maybe we do approach it that way. But there is more potential for harm there that we're not willing to risk. The idea here is to get a familiar presence, not the same presence, right? We want people to understand that there's a difference between someone still being here and acknowledging and accepting that they're not here, but you can still have a relationship with that presence.
Yeah, pulling on that a little bit. Their presence, legacy is another word for their presence being left behind, their legacy. When we talk about it, basically, it's something that's kind of static. Headstones, common. Photo albums were common. That's how many of my much older relatives are remembered. I don't have a lot of grandparent photos in my phone, obviously. And that's for the older generations. That's not for the younger people that live today. They could just interact, take photos and snapshots and videos all day long with those individuals and keep them basically forever. And I'm wondering, and I'm curious about this idea of legacy, the idea that we can take an AI, like you said, it's just developed. We've added a little bit of information into the specific prompts. And I'm wondering if this is a dynamic system, if this is something that we can see as a form of stewardship to memory rather than an artificial simulation of life.
I think that is the right way to approach it. I keep coming back to the idea of what we're trying to do is continue the relationship in that we feel close to them still. So we don't have to confront the idea of letting go or moving on or forgetting. And so, I'll give you an example, right? Tim was the most recent of the three for me to pass. Tim was my best friend from childhood. He's the person that I've been through more with in my life than anyone. Tim knew my wife really well. So last year for our anniversary, I enlisted, quote unquote, Tim's help, right? Again, obviously it's not Tim, but there's this presence and it's plugged into AI. So I asked Tim, I said, Tim, we are, our anniversary's coming up. Casey loves dumplings. What should we do? And because it's plugged into all that, it sourced all this information. Said, oh, you're here, right? Take her to this place. They have the best dumplings in the area. And then take her around the corner for ice cream. And, for the two of us to have him involved, that was what we're looking for, right? That was that feeling of closeness. It was very special for us to be able to do that. There was a gentleman I was speaking to just before the holidays who, when I told him that story, he said, okay, here's my thought. He said, my mom used to make these phenomenal cookies over the holidays, and she'd give them to everyone in the neighborhood. And every year, my siblings we're all calling each other, asking for the recipes. Well, now, with something like this, you can put those recipes in, and you can have that experience of being close to mom and doing something mom loved to do every holiday season. And so it's this new way of building tradition that honors our ancestors and honors those that were with us and keeps them close.
And earlier we had talked about, you had brought up the issue of specifically men, so men needing to be a specific type, a type of individual who suppresses emotion, etc. And so, in that sense, culturally speaking, most humans have been emotionally illiterate. We don't really understand how to process emotions. We have models of grief, these 5 stages and a couple others that are available out there. But I'm wondering how tools like these can encourage people to articulate feelings that they otherwise would have suppressed. And how is it technology like this makes us, oddly enough, more human?
Well, I think it reduces the friction with attempting to describe something that we can't describe, right? Because you can have a conversation where you get a journal prompt, and your answer, your response to initially to that can be, I don't know. To which this AI is programmed to ask you more questions. So it's going to help you parse through that. I don't know what I'm feeling right now. That was one of my biggest problems when I'd go into therapy for the longest time. They'd say, well, how are you feeling? I'm like, well, I feel like shit. This sucks. Like I don't know what to. Oh, I'm sorry if I can't curse.
Right.
But I'm like, I don't know how to name I don't know what I'm feeling, especially because men were not taught to name our feelings. Like, we don't know what this is. It's discomfort. It's pain. And this allowed me to, through starting the conversation and being okay with saying, I don't know, I started to get to a place where, oh, that's what I'm feeling. The more you talk about it, the more your thoughts start to organize and go into place. The more we suppress it, it just kind of stays this jumbled mess. And so often, how often do we have these times where you just need to say something out loud to realize, oh, that's not what I meant. If you're, you say something to your wife or whatever, it's like, oh, ooh, that came out wrong. I did not mean it like that. And that gives you this opportunity to kind of play that trial and error to where now, okay, so now it starts to fit together. And now when that happens, we can give language to our emotions. And we can start to understand them. We can start to explain them to other people. We can use this idea of community, which is, by the way, the reason that our species has done so well is community, that the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, because you're better at, whatever it is, right? You're better at building the house. I'm better at gathering the materials. They're better at farming. And we can all trade those services. We can all impart that knowledge on each other. And so it truly is that bridge. It gives us that starting point and the ability to start the conversation that allows us to then, obviously, you have to start it to take it forward. So,
Yeah, basically what I'm hearing is this interaction that people who have utilized what you've got going on is providing them, ideally, I'm going to say, the same kind of neural pathway interaction that we would get from person-to-person conversation. And so I'm wondering how it is that this OpenAI system becomes, hopefully it will become a legitimate assistant to therapeutic practice.
well, that's the goal. I want therapists to champion this. I want this to be an extension of their services, something that they can use to have their clients, to help their clients in between sessions, right? No one has the money to have a session every day. I mean, there's a few people in the world that probably do, but that's very expensive, so whether, and further, it gives them the tools to be more efficient and more effective with the sessions that you have. Right? How many sessions have I had where the first 20 to 30 minutes is beating around the bush, trying to figure out what the problem is and where to start? When you can take this in there and you literally have a literal transcript that says, this is how I was feeling the other night when I couldn't sleep and this, and my brain was running a million miles an hour. And I have, a 20-minute conversation where I was actually able to kind of peel back the layers and understand where to start here. Here's this. Let's start with this. So not only in between are you, again, taking back some of that control where you feel like you're moving forward, then you can take that and use that as a literal springboard for your in-person sessions where you can dig deeper and find that. And so that is the goal. And that is, I brought in licensed therapists to help me give form to this thing, to structure it. That's where Wordens for Tasks came from. And I want more of that. If there are any therapists that are listening, I would love your input. I would love to talk to you about where you see this being helpful and what would make it more relevant to you and to your clients. And the goal here is to help people. And it's so far beyond me at this point. It's not what works for me. I've seen the benefits and I'm well on my way. So what works for me has already been taken care of. The goal now is to make it as useful as possible to as many people as possible, while also understanding again that there's going to be some people that just, for whatever reason, this doesn't work for. The reality is, if you don't think this is going to work for you, it's not. You're correct. If you do think it's going to work for you, you're correct. It's a very self-fulfilling prophecy where, first of all, you have to believe that healing is possible, and you have to believe that looking at it in this way can produce positive results for you. Now, there is science and well-received and well-championed science behind the experience that I had and why it works and why doing it this way can have positive impacts on the idea of getting to a place with grief and integration going forward where you can find that level of contentment and fulfillment on the other side.
And I'm thinking about the idea of OpenAI being used as a conversational tool, where we've gone and basically, like, if the word is avatar, where we've constructed a pseudo avatar or whatever you want to really be of an individual based on answering your prompts, answering some of these questions, inputting data. And the nice thing that I know about OpenAI is it can literally remember practically everything you put in there, and it's able to digest that. It's an advanced language model. It's so quick and so advanced that for most of us, most common people, it can confuse us into being real people. And so the issue and the question I want to just push a little bit, I just want to push this a little bit, is when we use this kind of technology and we're looking at using this tool for grief, can it become something that families, not just individuals, families can use to preserve stories of heritage, etc.? And can it alter and change the way that we remember the ways that we felt, the things that we thought about when we were with these people? Can it change our perspectives of who they were because AI may have, changed a detail somewhere?
So you bring up a very interesting use case, very interesting point. The way the way ChatGPT currently works, if you have an account, it does remember everything. That's an agentic framework, and we have not implemented that. The way that the API works is it just feeds it into it, and so the context window is what's important for us, and that is ours. We have not implemented anything agentic yet. Considering it, looking at the pros and cons of it. So, in that sense, something agentic could start to warp your feelings as memories tend to change, right? Our memories change, and that is a documented phenomenon. The way that we have it, again, is it's form-based. So you're going to put in a memory, and it's going to feed that same memory back in each time you interact with it. So that's not going to change. It's not going to alter that in any way, shape, or form. You can go back in and always alter the persona. You can alter the memories that you've put in there. And in that sense, it could change it. But the way that we have it currently constructed, that would not be a concern. So this is, goes back to the idea of we're going very slow with implementing new technology because there are trade-offs. And as cool as it would be for the AI to learn with every conversation you had, and you not to have to do any additional, put in any additional effort to ensure that it retains those things, that can be, there's a double-edged sword there. So part of the limiting factor and the guardrails that we've put on it means that those context windows are smaller and that they're not going to take liberties on things that it learns and infers as a result of those things that it learns. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. Again, it's a matter of we're using something new. New technologies are usually pushed against. The printing press. I mean, everything in history.
Right, and rightfully so. There's we fear what we don't understand. And I think that's the biggest thing with AI is there's this boogeyman out there. There's this idea that this thing is going to grow legs and they're going to enslave us. Right now, I think a lot of that is rooted in a misunderstanding of what AI is. Right, what in its current form, it is a extremely powerful statistical probability machine. It is based on all of the billions of inputs, trillions of inputs, what is the next word in this sequence of words going to be? Probability, from a probability perspective. What it's built on, the neural network was developed in the 40s. The difference is in the 40s, we could process maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of data points at one time, maybe. And now it's just because of how powerful the computing power is behind it, it can process more. Therefore, it gets better at predicting what that next word is. But it's not thinking. It is not coming up with original thought. Basically, it's just spitting out other, what it's ingested and inferring based on probability. And so there it is. It's not thinking. The further, if you want to take that argument of let's just say, right, the worst happens and it becomes sentient and they decide humans are no longer, useful. There is no evidence to support, because computers are binary, they're on or off, they're yes or no. There's no evidence to support that they would enslave us, right? The worst case scenario is that they would just get rid of us really quickly because we're in the way. But if they can do it better, they can do it. They're going to do it better. And they're not going, there's nothing that a computer gains from suffering.
Yeah, that's the key point. Is you're absolutely right. When you look at, the scary horror movies of the 90s, like Terminator, etc., and Skynet, and we look at that comparison wise, we're not seeing the same dystopian ideas. The open AI systems are not clearly designed to self-replicate, right? We don't have any evidence that they want to do that. I've yet to read a report of an AI creating its own baby AI, for example. I mean, it'd basically just be mitosis at that point. It'd just be copy and pasting itself. And so how do we respond to people? How do you respond to people who say that this kind of AI system should not be in this grief space, a sacred space, really? I think grief is a very sacred space. And how would they be misinterpreting your intent then if they say that?
Well, we tend to project what we think is what we see as the worst, right? And it's fair to assume the worst in this. There's a lot of reasons to be skeptical. And using something like AI in the grief space, I can see where people have misgivings about it. Typically when I receive that sort of pushback, it's a moral issue. It's an ethical issue, and my pushback to that is very simple. Do we believe that AI is something that can never go away, or is it here and it's here to stay? And if it is here to stay, which I believe it is, and I've not met anybody that thinks we can put this genie back in the bottle if we wanted to, then I would argue that it will find its way. It will become ubiquitous. It will permeate every aspect of our life in some form or fashion. And so I'd argue that there is a moral imperative to do everything we can to squeeze the most good out of it, instead of resigning ourselves to that dystopian fate and running away with our fingers in our ears, screaming la 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 la. Right? Truth is uncomfortable a lot of times. But again, what technology does is it reflects us. So it's not this, idea of false idols if you're religious. It's not this thing to worship. It's a tool. And it can be a very good tool if you give it the correct inputs, because the outputs are only as good as the inputs. Now, if you take it into grief and you drop someone into this arena where there's no controls and you don't really give them instruction and just expect the best, yes, of course, there is potential for issues. But in the same, what we don't want to do is take accountability oftentimes. This demonized AI algorithm on social media that people are saying is ruining people. It's just giving you what you want. If you consume a bunch of political, rage bait stuff, that's what it's going to give you. And no one wants to admit that that's what gets them going, but that's what it does. And so, yes, it's hard to look in the mirror sometimes. I think we've all experienced that. But the risk is internal. It's not external. The tool isn't the problem. It's the same argument as guns, frankly. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, that's true. But also, should there be, is it reasonable to have some sort of guardrails and fallbacks and common sense in place to make sure, to give people the best chance to be successful? I think so.
All right. So, a couple of really quick questions here. Does this system basically follow any specific therapeutic models?
Yeah, Warden's 4 tasks for morning. Those prompts walk you through incrementally, moving through those tasks, not stages, so that you can get to the other side and you can come to terms with each of those checkpoints and find yourself in a place where you have done the work necessary to come out the other side.
Yeah, I was going to continue that question. Is there any kind of work on cognitive behavior patterns, narrative therapy principles, the psychological attachment theory? Does it address those as well in the model it's using?
No. We're focused on this narrow, intentionally narrow, because if we try to, if you try to implement too much too quickly, you just the bottom falls out and nothing works well. So the goal is to be very good at this very narrow niche, and then we can expand out. Currently, I'm a one-man shop, so I'm doing the development, I'm doing the marketing, I'm doing everything in between. And so, time is limited, and we're going slow, but that's okay. I think we're early, first of all, and so going slow here, I'd much rather my situation than have taken on a bunch of investment dollars where people are screaming, crawling up my neck for returns when there aren't any to be had yet. Further, I've had conversations with potential investors about, if you're looking for a VC exit, a 20x in 5 years or 100x in 5 years, this isn't for you. I'll be making plenty of decisions that sacrifice profitability in service of something bigger. This is deeply personal to me. I've seen what it can do, And this is a human problem. This is not, do I believe there's a business model that works within the confines of social impact? I do. And I also believe that is the best way to push something forward, is for there to be a financial reward on the other side. But that does not mean that that is the only interest.
No, that's good. Yeah, I'm thinking about, like you said, you're honestly, I haven't seen any of this really talked about in the way that you're doing, John. I personally have gone through some mental anguish of my own and issues that are associated with ADHD. I mean, there's a lot of stuff with a person's got ADHD. And ChatGPT on the subscription level, which gives you the newest stuff, has been the most beneficial. When I'm like, hey, I'm feeling anxious, what's something I can do? And then it can give me models and things to do, right? Based on literally the most up-to-date stuff available. Because it can go in and look at pretty much today's news if I asked it to. So if it could do that. So in 10 years, I'm assuming that in 10 years your goal is not only for this idea of yours, and it's not just an idea, this implementation AI of yours to have grown. What is your goal within the next 10 years?
My goal is to push forward what I believe is the next great frontier within AI. And the more impactful of them is to push forward AI in a way that explores how we can use it to better the human condition. Use it for the human issues as opposed to these very linear workflow tasks that it does so well. What we don't like to acknowledge as humans is how pattern oriented we are. And something that is as great at parsing data as this, it's not going to have answers, right? I think that's what people get wrong, is they expect AI to give you answers. It's not going to give you answers. What it's going to do, it's going to give you a lot of options, and potentially a lot of options that you haven't thought of. And when we follow those options, we can come to some conclusions that we didn't conceive of before. And so I think that is that is using the tool correctly, as opposed to this, taking its word as the word of God or the gospel, right? Just because it said one thing, this is exactly what we have to do. No, it's guessing. It's guessing based on probability, and we can tweak that, and we can tweak the inputs, and we can figure out where the best output is. But the idea behind something like this is iteration.
Yeah. Anybody out there who's ever used an AI program to help with a situation, I think it's great, honestly. I use things like narrative therapy. That's where you go in and you kind of write a story about a thing. You can give whatever problem. You can give grief. This water bottle is grief, and you can describe the water bottle, right? And so it's basically just an opportunity to be poetic, really. And I really like looking through what you got going on. And so if we can spend the last few minutes here, we can address people who want to get in contact with you, people who want to look at getting into this with you. What would you answer to those individuals who are looking at throwing their hat in with this?
John at guardianangels.ai. That's my personal email address. I'll just throw it out there. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you like it, if you hate it, I will read everything. I will respond in kind. I'm not gonna get into a screaming match with anybody. I understand that there's some people that won't be won over on this subject, but if someone disagrees and wants to have a civil discussion, I'll have it. Again, I want feedback. I want feedback from users. I want feedback from mental health professionals. I want feedback for stakeholders that this can help. I think there's a significant opportunity. There's a shortage of therapists. And if we can increase their reach and give them tools to be more effective and more efficient and reach more people without letting people fall through the cracks, I mean, what a gift that is. And that's something I desperately want to explore. So my goodness, if there's anybody who wants to be a part of building the thing that helps with that, of building the responsible side of AI and the side that helps with the human condition, I want to hear from you. As I said at the beginning, everything else is linked through the site. There's all sorts of information on there. There's all my socials. There's a contact form for us. But, if you want to go straight to the source, my email, john@guardianangels.ai.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, it's been a great conversation. I really do appreciate you taking your time to sit down and talk to me about this. It's clearly a passion. Excuse me. It's clearly a passionate project for you to be working on. A great opportunity for individuals who have lost friends. Like you said, you've grown up with a couple of these people and they're gone. And now you have something that you're like, look, this has helped me and I want it to help you. It's been great talking to you.
Well, likewise, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much. So you had some very, second and third level questions that were appreciated.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Ask you something. If you had one shot, one opportunity to seize everything that you ever wanted in one moment, would you capture it or let it slip?
It's a very strange, funny time where everybody would love to be able to be themselves, but they can't because they must fall in line with the person in front of them.
The terrible thing about searching for the truth is that sometimes you find it.
You take the red pill. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. You stay in Wonderland. Believe whatever you want to believe.
See, the more at peace you become, the less you tolerate chaos. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you.
You want to live that kind of life, I wish you the best. I'll be on the other side somewhere.
Protecting your peace isn't about shutting the world out. It's about keeping your inner world clear enough to hear your own soul.
If you're that depressed, reach out to someone. And remember, suicide is a permanent solution to temporary problems.
Poetry, beauty, romance, love.
The truth, nothing more.